Like, I don't know if you heard of some of the stuff that we do, but we do a vlog
Mm,
where we talk about things that are washing in, and we call it beach combing. So
okay.
different items washing in. And so we have over 130 episodes of that done. And so that we do one of those every week.
Oh, that's
And
great. Well, so
yeah,
let's get
you'd be
into it then.
amazed at like the type of stuff that washes up. I think like this week, we had a hammerhead that washed up that was still alive. That like I mean, it was just flapping around on the beach. So we picked it up and put it back in, and we
Man,
hope that we saved its life. We have no idea, but it swam off.
that's intense. So,
Yeah.
Jace, for folks that don't know, can you introduce yourself and let everyone know what you do?
Okay. Yeah. So my name's Jace Tunnell. I'm the reserve director at the Mission Aransas Research Reserve, which is a part of the University of Texas Marine Science Institute. And we do everything from research to education outreach. We have a stewardship program where we're teaching people about how to be stewards for the land. And then finally, we have a training program where we're taking that science that we've gathered and translating that into layman's terms so that decisions can be made about protection of habitats and then the animals living within those.
Very important work. I was excited to talk to you today because in early March of this year, it was reported on that the state of Texas was going to pass some pretty stringent requirements for all these chemical companies that produce plastic pellets or nurdles. And then October timeframe came around, and then the TCEQ was like, "Well, we're not going to be able to do it." So, what the hell happened? I mean, why didn't anything pass?
Yeah, so I guess every 5 years, TCEQ has to go through this process of renewing their Texas water quality standards. And so if there's anything that needs to be updated, new technology comes out or new information, they have the opportunity to change the way they're doing things. Well, when we got word that they were going to be wanting to add some language in there about plastic pellets and the handling of plastic pellets, me and a guy from Neil McQueen is his name from Surfrider Foundation. He's from the local chapter here, who's been really involved in trying to reduce the use of plastic through restaurant work that they've been doing and banning plastic bags. Him and I were like, "Oh, this is a good opportunity. We got to go up to the state capitol and just thank TCEQ." So this was in March, where they had a public comment period. So we went up there. It actually wasn't in the Capitol. It was in the TCEQ, their headquarters office. So we went up and just made a simple statement about thanks for adding plastic pellets in here. It's important work. And then it looked like everything was a go. That they had it in there that to where any visible plastic would not be allowed to be released. And so October comes around and apparently they didn't just modify the language; they just took it all out,
Yeah.
like nothing was in there. And we never did get an answer from TCEQ of why they had done that, but we did hear through the grapevine that they might have done that because the plastics industry was going to create this lawsuit against the state for having something in there that was not achievable. And so that's kind of disappointing because, I don't know how familiar y'all are with the Formosa lawsuit that Diane Wilson had against Formosa, where they were discharging billions of plastic pellets into a creek that eventually flows into Lavaca and Matagorda Bay.
Right.
And, it was the largest class act settlement, Clean Water Act settlement that had ever been done by a single individual. And they settled for 50 million. And that's actually how Nurdle Patrol we get $1 million of that. And so we get 200,000 every year for doing all the work we're doing about plastic pellets. But one of the reasons they settled that lawsuit was because Formosa Plastics agreed to put into their permit that they would have zero plastic pellet loss. So we know it's achievable, or they would not have agreed to that. Now they're having to do about $30 million worth of engineering on site to be able to put the measures in place so that pellets can't be released. And then they're also doing 30 million. Actually, I think it's only about $29 million worth of cleanup, which is going on right now. So where their stormwater discharges into that creek, they're having to go in and just scrape down from 6 inches to a foot of sediment out, go back in and replant the whole creek area. And so they're hoping that that's going to remove any legacy plastic pellets, and then they're hoping that they're not going to be discharging any new plastic pellets. Although that doesn't solve their problem of wastewater. They actually have plastic pellets that are going out their wastewater, and they're being fined almost every day because of that. And that's going into the trust that Diane Wilson had set up called the Matagorda Bay Mitigation Trust. And that trust divvies out money for restoration projects, research projects, education projects, all within the Matagorda and San Antonio Bay area. And so actually, if you look at how much research and education is going on per bay system in Texas, and there's 7 major bay systems, Matagorda Bay right now is probably getting more research done, more information coming in, more education than any other bay system, because Formosa Plastics is having to pay for that through that trust. So it's sort of exciting times, but you think about how we got there, and it's not a good way that we got there because of all the pollution that went into that bay system.
It's pretty remarkable how much influence these companies have over the state, because we know it's bad. We know it, the detriments that these plastics, these little pellets cause to the environment, to the animals, and the TCEQ, the government, the state of Texas bowed down to these companies is essentially what happened, right?
Well, so, TCEQ did make some changes into their general permits. So all companies, and there's over 14,000 of them that are doing business within Texas that are, in manufacturing. And so there's a lot of manufacturing. It's not necessarily just plastics, but there's metals and, all kinds of things. They all have to get this general permit. And so TCEQ did go in and they said they didn't put zero plastic pellet loss, which is what we were hoping they would do. They ended up putting that there is no, it was something like visible plastic pellets or something. But, that's sort of a loophole, because the, whatever the company is that's manufacturing, if TCEQ goes out and they do an inspection and they find plastic, the company could, in theory, say, oh, well, we didn't see that. That wasn't visible to us. Whereas if you had zero plastic pellet loss, now it's like, okay, you're allowed zero, and whether you can see it or not, it's like, you need to be able to have the processes and the best management practices in place to keep that on your site and not let it out into state waters. And so that's what we were really hoping for. And that we had actually put out the Texas Nurdle bill, and, Nurdle Patrol didn't do that, but the Surfrider Foundation did that. And so really from the Nurdle Patrol perspective, we're not, and at the university level, we're not allowed to advocate for anything, but we can gather data and we can talk about awareness. And so really we look to our partners to be able to do the advocacy part of it. So we're just gathering the data, and then they're able to do, what they do with it, which luckily is, there's folks that have experience working through the legislative process and, trying to get bills passed to mandate that the state change the way they do things. Now, for TCEQ, I don't know, because they haven't told us, behind the scenes of why some of the changes haven't been made, whether they're thinking big picture on something that maybe we're not thinking about. Maybe there's a better way to do things than what they initially proposed. We don't know. We kind of try to hope for the best, that they have the environment in mind, but we know that that's not always the case. We did actually, with the Surfrider Foundation, we met with Representative Todd Hunter. He's the state representative that authored the Texas Nurdle bill back in 2021. He invited us up to the state capitol. There was Toby Baker, who was the executive director of TCEQ at the time. I think just recently he left that position. And then we also met with lobbyists from the plastics industry. And so when we went into the office, the plastic lobbyists initially said, well, this is all Formosa and you're trying to make changes to all the plastics industry. And luckily, I kind of knew that might be what they would say. So I had a color coded map that was printed up from nurdlepatrol.org, which we have a map of concentrations of plastic pellets. And we have about 12 different industries that we've sampled right outside the fence line that we found nurdles at. And so that, I was able to show, look, there's plastic pellets at all these other industries that we know are coming from them. I mean, there's a lot of them in Texas. But the problem is you can go to their fence line, but their stormwater might be draining directly into a bay where there's other industries draining into. So it's hard to distinguish whose nurdles are whose, because it's all proprietary on who makes what. And so so I could take a nurdle that I found on the beach out here, and I could take it to a manufacturer and they could say, yeah, I made that one, or they could say, no, we didn't. And they can do that two different ways. One's from the chemical makeup of the nurdle, and then one's based on the shape and size because of the way they're made through the extrusion process. But there are 12 specifically that we know where they came from. And so this isn't just a one manufacturer that's polluting. It's the entire industry. And it's not just at the manufacturing site. It's how they transport these through rail, through truck, through shipping. Whenever they offload them at the factory that's either going to distribute them or melt them down and make them into a product, they're getting on the ground there. And so, you can, if you look at the nurdlepatrol.org website and look at the map, you can see some surveys that have been done out in New Mexico or West Texas, way inland from the ocean. So it's not just an ocean problem. These things are along railroads, all over the country. And so really there's a role to play at the federal government because they can really regulate large scale. But I think what we're noticing is that we can actually do something at the state level. And so that's why we're trying to work with partners in different states of trying to make changes to general and industrial permits to say zero plastic pellet loss.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, you're talking about the producer and then the transport and then the actual user. Do you think you monitor the transport and the user just as much as the producers?
I think we're data. So we have over 15,000 surveys that have been done at over 2,100 countries. Most of them are within the U.S. Most of those surveys, most of them are along beaches. There's quite a few along rivers and stuff like that. But the ones along beaches, I mean, we don't know. We don't know whether they came from rail line or industry. I think that if you look in Texas, we have more industrial sites, like right at the fence line, right at the stormwater that comes out of the properties. We have more in Texas than anywhere in the U.S. That have been sampled. And up until recently, I had not been outside of a fence line of a manufacturing site. And whether that was along their rail line that goes in and out of their facility or their stormwater drain, I had not been to a facility and not found nurdles. But there's a company here, a big Exxon SABIC plant that started up in Portland, Texas. I went outside of their fence line before they started producing, and we didn't find any, which is good. But that was sort of the baseline. So I'd always tell communities that are saying, we have this big plastic plant coming, what should we do? And, you'll have the environmental folks that are going out and trying to fight them coming in. But whether they win or not on that front, I was like, you need to have a baseline. You need to go out before they start producing to see, are there nurdles there? How many are there? If they're not nurdles, so you have something to compare to afterwards. That's sort of a basic science type project. It's like before and after, But I got a tour of the Exxon plant here, and they, because of Nurdle Patrol and all the attention on these plastics getting out to the environment, they actually put in millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure to prevent plastics from getting out. And so, they started producing in January of this year. They have not there has not been like a massive rainstorm, which that's when you would expect for these to get off site from a manufacturing site is during heavy rains. We haven't had a big rainstorm, so it'd be hard to know if they've lost any. And based on my tour that I had, they have about 5 different stopping points and debris separators on site that I'd be really surprised if I ever found any outside of their facility. Now, the thing you got to think about is nobody's really shed a light on this being a problem until we started up this Nurdle Patrol. I mean, there's been projects here and there that have said, yeah, there's a problem, but nothing continuous, long-term, really broad. And so nobody was, building their facility for keeping these on site because nobody, they didn't know it was a problem. So you think about like Formosa Plastics that was built, I think back in the 80s or something, they were never built to keep these on site. And so now they're having to go back in and retrofit. I mean, $30 million for, re-engineering their site. There's a lot of these big companies that are going to have to do the same type of thing. And so, we need to be cognizant of that when we're asking them to make changes to zero. We want zero plastic pellet loss, but, maybe we ought to give them 2 or 3 years to spend 30 million to redo their site,
Right. So, I mean, the Nurdle Patrol, that organization, if you just Google it for anyone who's wondering, that's like one of the most well-respected and has the most documentation, I think, on, compared to other websites. How much collaboration do y'all get with these chemical companies? I'm at are y'all working together to solve solutions? I've seen many quotes where you said that, you're not trying to point a finger at these companies, but you'd rather, collaborate together to come up with a workable solution. Is that happening with these companies?
Yeah, I think to some degree, it will never happen fully without strict regulation and fines associated with it. So there needs to be regulation, and then there needs to be follow-up by TCEQ. Well, if we're in Texas, I mean, other states need to do the same thing. Their state agency that's supposed to be regulating these companies need to have, a way to be able to go in and say, are you releasing pellets or not? And if you are, we're going to fine you until you fix the problem. And most states don't have the manpower for that. So it's up to the citizens. That's what's so great about the Nurdle Patrol is we're giving people the tools to be able to go out, and your tools are basically your fingers for going out, you don't need like any kind of real tools. But you just need time and know where to go look to be able to say, is there a problem or not? And then if there is, we give you a way to be able to put it into a map, and you can print it up digitally or hard copy and take it to your elected official or take it to the state agency. But, we've had a lot of industry folks come take me to lunch, call me and want to talk about Nurdle Patrol and tell me about the things that they're doing. The one thing that all industry always tells me is that they are in Operation Clean Sweep.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you heard about that program, but back in the early 90s, the plastics industry saw that there was a problem with all these nurdles getting out because the EPA had just come out with a report that was called Plastic Pellets in the Aquatic Environment, Sources and Recommendations. And in there, they had over 80 species of birds that they knew about at the time that were eating these. It was there's an image in that document. It's like a black and white image of a bird intestine with like 12 different pellets in there that the bird died from, because it was like the bird either it twists their intestines around to where they can't eat anything natural, or the bird just feels full and They end up dying. So, and they also have other species like of fish and turtles and stuff, but they knew that there was a problem. So they created this Operation Clean Sweep, and it's a voluntary program where they can get in there, and it has some really good stuff in there actually about best management practices for keeping nurdles on site, how to clean them up, all this stuff. But the problem is it's voluntary. So whenever an industry tells me that, oh yeah, we're in that, I was like, well, Formosa is in that program too. I was like, you heard of Formosa, right? So the problem is voluntary. So what we'd like to see is like states taking some of those best management practices and making them mandatory for, these companies, the manufacturers. And, there's also some other things. So I think we really shed a light on how bad the nurdle pollution is along railroads. You can look, if you try to search anything on railroads and plastic pollution, you will not find it. There's nothing out there. There's no scientific papers. There might be something that the railroad has that's not published or anything. It's like a technical report or something. But I've talked to a lot of railroad folks, and they tell me that there are just piles of nurdles as they're going down the rail line all over the place. And so I actually talked to some guy from Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago who's been working on the rail line for 35 years. And he told me that the issue is not when the rail cars leaving the plastics manufacturing site, because there the valves are closed, the caps are on, they're sealed up. They don't want that product getting out or getting dirty, because that if it's contaminated, it's not worth anything. But once it gets to where it's being offloaded, there's 2 valves, one on each side of the train, and there's 4 different like silos in each one of these. Well, they have to undo the valve on one side, so there's airflow when they're sucking all these nurdles out. So they will suck out all the nurdles to the amount that they purchased. So whatever the client purchased. The problem is whoever's unloading doesn't go back, because they have to crawl under the rail car. They don't go back and they don't put the valve on the back side. They put the cap on the front side and say, oh, we're done. So whenever that rail car is coming back, there could still be 300 pounds of nurdles in there. And that's just leaking out all the way back to where they get to the manufacturing site, where they clean out the rail car, get all the product out of there to be able to fill it back up. And so it's not all sealed back up until, the manufacturer does it. So that is a key thing that can be fixed. And so I've spoken with, a couple of years ago, I spoke with this company that said they knew that rail cars were the problem, and they were blaming all the nurdles for the railroads, but that's obviously not true based on all the data that's been collected. But they're definitely a big source of them. So they had a chain of custody that they were requiring, so that they would know who offloaded, and if the rail cars got back to the manufacturing site with the caps off and the valves were open, they knew who they had to go talk to educate them about, hey, you need to make sure the caps are back on there correctly.
Yeah.
The thing about the plastics industry is it's time is money. And if you're paying somebody to go over there and clean up say it's only 1,000 nurdles, which that sounds like a lot, but that is worth, a penny or something like that. They're not going to want their person to go clean all that up when they could be offloading, all this product and getting the rail cars in and out. I mean, time is money when it comes to the plastics.
I think, talking about transport, Mike and I are in the industry, and one thing that we know that happens is these rail cars, these compartments get broken into, especially when they're traveling across border lines. They're used for smuggling things often. So, these people are cutting open these compartments, whether it's on top or bottom, and then that's inevitably just spilling all this product as it's in transport.
Right. That's so unfortunate. It seems like something that could that's fixable. Yeah. With whether it's training or whatever. That seems like it's something that could be 100% preventable.
Yeah. Another, we just talked to Air Alliance Houston a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned the same thing you did, resources. It's like the TCQ is just drowning when it comes to manpower, because there's like all these different facets that we have to work with. We have to work with these nurdles. We have to work with air pollution, and it's like they don't have the time or the manpower to dedicate to all these companies that are along the Gulf Coast. And it's almost a shame that it takes organizations like yours to keep these companies honest.
Right. I mean, Texas is pro-industry. And so whenever you're pro-industry, you're bringing in all these new folks that need to be regulated in some way or another, whether it's air, water, everything has to be permitted. There's got to be, all these things that have to be followed, and then they need to be followed back up on. A lot of the stuff in Texas is self-reporting, so it's like, okay, we're we're asking the companies that we're supposed to be regulating to tell us whether they're doing something wrong or not, and then we'll fine them if they are. It's like, well, who's going to self-report something wrong, you know? But the problem with being pro industry, and then you're not able to get more. You used to have the same staff you had, but you have all these other people you got to permit, you know?
Yeah.
So it's led to this not having enough staff to do everything that needs to be done. So it really does fall on citizens to try to help regulate. And honestly, I've put in quite a few complaints with TCEQ when it comes to plastic pellets. So if I do a survey on the outside of a fence line or on a creek that I know that there's only one manufacturer, so it has to be coming from that facility, you can put a complaint in. TCEQ they're required to go out within 14 days and do an unannounced inspection. And they will do follow-ups. They have all this documentation and pictures, and there's actually been quite a few changes that have been done based on those reports. And so it takes them about a year to get a report done, and they document all, and it'll be a thick packet that they'll mail me at the end of it, saying what was done. They never tell me what the fines were. I have a feeling there's probably very few fines. You know, it's like you need to put more barriers up at this location and stuff like that to show that they're doing the right thing. But to say that is like that. I always tell people, if you're by a facility and it's coming from them, put in a complaint to TCQ, because then it gets on the official record. NurdlePatrol.org is awesome for awareness, and other organizations taking the data and trying to do something with it and showing that there's a problem. But if you want it to be on an official state record, Nurdle Patrol is not the official state record. And so if the state is going to do changes by themselves without, like a Nurdle bill coming along, they need to show that in their system that there's a problem. And by filing that complaint, it gets into the official system. And so we always ask Nurdle Patrol citizen scientists to do that if possible.
And what was the lady's name that caught
Diane Wilson?
Diane Wilson. How did she escalate that so far and quickly?
Well, I wouldn't say it was quickly. She's been fighting Formosa for, I guess, a couple of decades on air and water, things like that.
She got laughed at a couple of times. Like, people wouldn't take her serious when she first reported it, like in 2015 or 16, whenever she noticed it.
She couldn't get, the EPA wouldn't listen to her. She couldn't get any traction. And actually, we have an entire 4-part series videos on our YouTube channel at Mission Aransas Reserve. And the first video is about her growing up as a 4th-generation shrimper. And in the little town of Seadrift, right near where Formosa Plastics is. And then the second one is her fight with Formosa. The second one's her work with Nurdle Patrol. And then the fourth is like the future, what she has going on. But she actually went out and collected samples for 3 years. So she started, I want to say it was around 2016, going out every single day. She had her, and then she had fishermen, and she had employees that worked in Formosa that were sick and tired of the pollution. They knew the pollution that was happening. So they were helping her, and they went out every day for 3 years. And they brought all the samples into the judge and said, look, this is what they've been polluting with. This is only just a fraction of what they've put out there. And I mean, it was like a trailer full of baggies that were all labeled on the date they were there, how long they surveyed, a specific location. And so I met Diane when they were about halfway through going and collecting all their samples. It was around 2018 when I met her. And when I figured out what she was doing, I said, hey, Nurdle Patrol, I was like, if you could do some samples there, you could really kind of gauge how bad Formosa is compared to all these other areas that are being sampled. And sure enough, they ended up, whenever they went in and spoke to the judge, they used the Nurdle Patrol data to really show, look, Formosa plastic is horrible compared to all these other places that are being sampled. And so that was really the nail in the coffin for that case, and showing that, look, okay, we got to do something about this, because what's been happening is not okay.
Can you talk about what the plastic pellets do once they're released? Because I didn't know that they kind of attract other toxins or other toxic chemicals to them. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so there's two main things that are really bad about the nurdles being in the environment. One is what we kind of already talked about, where we have animals that are eating them, feeling like they're full, twisting their intestines around. That's not good. If they eat one of them, like a turtle, it probably passes right through. It's whenever they eat a bunch of them. So a place like Galveston Bay that just has so many nurdles in it, that's a huge bay system. You'd expect fish and birds and sea turtles to be consuming a lot of these. That's bad. The other bad thing is that these act like sponges when they're out in the environment, and so they absorb to the outside of them harmful chemicals. And so you can think about PCBs that are in like your light fixtures, PAHs that come out of your cars, DDT, which is banned in the US but still legal like in Mexico and stuff like that. If that is in the water, which many areas have that, mercury is another one. If that's in the water, it's going to get on the outside of these nurdles and it's going to cause a big problem. And how we know that is these chemicals have already been tested in animals. And, we know that it creates behavior changes. And so when you have behavior changes in animals, like with birds, for example, how they act is how they attract a mate. And then that's how they reproduce. So if you're creating endocrine disruptors, which is how they reproduce, and you're creating behavior changes as how they get a mate, you can cause big time problems. And so, we know these chemicals make a problem with these animals. What we don't know is the chemicals, once they're eaten, do those chemicals come off of the pellet and then through the stomach lining and into like the muscle tissue or some of the other organs? And so where we worry about like human health, and we don't have this answer yet, but do those chemicals go through the stomach lining into the muscle tissue that then we're eating? So you think about redfish and trout. Diane Wilson, as being a fisherman, she's talked to a lot of fishermen where, they're cutting open the fish to see what they've been eating, and they'll find plastic pellets in them. So it's a real concern of that we should, and there's people looking into this as well. There's researchers that are raising fish that can be adults in 3 months. They're small fish, feeding them plastic, seeing if there's an impact, putting chemicals on that plastic, feeding them that to see if there's any kind of, changes that they see. So there's people that are looking into that. The problem is we're exposed to so many other things in the environment, same with the animals, that it's hard to distinguish, what is the cause of why aren't we having as many kids as we like? Well, why couldn't I have kids still? It took me 7 years to have a kid, whatever. So, there's a lot of things out there that we don't have answers to. And, why is that? Is it from the chemicals on the nurdles, or was it from something else I was exposed to? And these are answers that we need to have to make a really good argument for making $1 trillion changes, to things that we've been doing in the past.
Yeah, no, agree. It's a very challenging fight. Like, where do you see this ending? Like, what would be I guess your dream if you could wave a wand? Because even if we say we get to 0% pellets leaving manufacturing facilities, we still have all these pellets that are in the environment, right? So
right, and those things will be out there for hundreds of years. Ultimately, if the federal government would come out and actually at an international level, if they would say that they would categorize nurdles as hazardous material, that would change the way that these are handled, how they're shipped, when they're disposed of, where they're disposed of. It would actually change everything. But that would cost trillions of dollars of changes, because of everything, from not only the manufacturer, but from the transporters and the people that are just bagging these up to put them in containers to ship them all over the world. It would really, it'd be great from the environmental side of things. From the petroleum industry side of things, it would cost them a lot of money. Yeah. But ultimately, that's what we'd want. We don't see that happening anytime soon. and then the other thing that we'd like to see is like, you've probably heard of the circular economy,
Yeah.
where, it's, I don't know if it's realistic or not, but we would only create things that could be 100% recycled or 100% reused. And so it's not like something like that would change overnight. I mean, everything that's been produced up to this point, a lot of it's like single use throwaway. It's like it's a culture shift, and it's going to have to be something that the industry is still making money at. They have shareholders. The problem is, you got these big companies that have shareholders that they have to answer to, and if you're not making money, you're not making them money. The whole system kind of collapses. We've kind of set ourselves up for failure.
There's a lot of people talking about it now. The Nurdles is like one part of the plastic discussion, and then there's another part of people like Dr. Shayna Swan, who's doing like studies on how plastics may impact human body function. So there's like talks of phthalates and like microplastics being like consumed in vegetables, like grown in soil in the vegetables. So if we can like piece those together, because right now they're kind of like separate talks, but I feel like we can somehow combine that discussion and make it like something bigger. It's the same fight,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and what's different about Nurdles is that really this is industry. This is industry. This isn't anything that you and I can do to really stop this, other than what the Nurdle Patrol is doing, and then the partners of trying to advocate for change by getting with political leaders to mandate changes at the state level. But this is industry being sloppy with no accountability. This isn't that if I stop using less plastic, there'll be less Nurdles. That's not necessarily the case. So, really this is an industry thing. Whereas a lot of this other stuff, a lot of these other microplastics that is being found in our seafood, in our plants, we're supposedly consuming a credit card worth of plastics every week, which whenever I do laundry, I know why, because the big plume of plastic. But the secondary plastic that's been a product that's breaking down over time and is getting into our seafood that then we're consuming is different than the Nurdle issue. I see that the Nurdle issue is industry. They need to really clean up kind of what they're doing and how they're handling these things. And secondary plastic, man, that's a harder one to do, because that has to do with not only who makes the product, but who uses the product and how they dispose of it and how it's being managed at a city level even. That it's a hard one. And there is stuff we can do about that. We can choose what products we use. But at the end of the day, the plastic manufacturing, the plastics industry is very creative and thinking of new ways to use the plastic. It kind of blows my mind. I go into a store and there's individually wrapped apples in plastic. I'm like, why is this apple have plastic around it? And I understand it keeps bugs off and it'll make it last longer. But at the same time, we got to think, that a lot of the films and stuff like that are not recyclable. We just, a lot of places do not recycle it. And if it is, it goes into being made into carpets. It's not being made into something new that can be recycled over and over again. It's like this one-time use and it's over.
Yeah.
It's done.
I didn't know until recently that our clothes are made from plastic. I never associated, I always thought like plastic's hard. Like it's a hard thing that we make toys out of or stuff like that, or wrap our food in, but polyester and nylon and anything stretchable is basically made from plastic.
Yeah, that's right. And they can be real soft too. So people like it.
Yeah.
My shirt right here, this is made out of plastic,
Yeah.
But the problem is, like what I was saying with the laundry, I do the laundry in my house, but whenever I go to clean out that air filter thing, it's like, poof, all in my face. But we do. I mean, you can make the decision to
buy wool.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Can you imagine? We're just all walking around with wool and linen.
Not in South Texas, man.
Wool bathing suits.
Yeah.
The circular economy discussion kind of makes me laugh because even in our city where Mike and I are from, we learned from the mayor that recycling, what you think you're recycling is actually not even being recycled. So that's like a whole nother topic of plastic waste.
There was a really good, it was a documentary, and actually Diane Wilson was in it. It was Frontline News came out with this. It was called Dirty Money. It's on Netflix. But there was one episode there where they were talking about nurdle pollution and all that kind of stuff. But they got into recycling and why it came about. And the plastics industry, this is another industry-led program that they came up with because they saw real quickly that, people were feeling bad about when these plastics get into the environment and then, or they're just using it one time and there's nothing, it's wasteful. It's really wasteful. So plastics industry came up with this concept of recycling. Use as much plastic as you want. We're going to make it into something new, and so that way people didn't feel bad about just using it one time and then it's gone. But that it just never, there was no really infrastructure put into place and no incentives. So, a lot of the stuff was recycled and just made into, the bottom of carpets or whatever they made them into. And it's not going, if somebody recycles a water bottle, it will never be another water bottle. Mm-hmm. You'll never see that product again. It was never meant to work. It was meant for the plastics industry to delay time and still be able to produce plastic. And that's what this Frontline News story kind of did, was it kind of laid all that out. And they went to the guy who initially started up the program of recycling, and he said it was never going to work. This was just so we could keep producing plastic to make people feel like they're doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, even here in Corpus Christi, where I'm at, they don't recycle plastic bags or anything film related. It's very few items, no straws, anything that's smaller than a bottle cap, they don't resize. And actually a bottle cap, they say, if you have a water bottle, throw your water bottle in the recycle, but throw your cap in the trash. They can't recycle that. It's too small. The no glass, of course, we're not, I guess that's a different subject. But the plastic side of thing, it's only hard, durable plastics. Nothing with food in it. No chemicals. It's like, okay, what are we left with here?
I kind of like what I think California, San Francisco is doing. They throw away their food products in a separate trash can, and then I think they recycle in another. But the third one that's non-recyclables, whatever you throw away, you have to pay for. You have to pay for the disposal of that. So it's an incentive to use the other two more. But especially the food. The food gets composted for soil and stuff. Yeah, I think is your
Kiss documentary. The Ground documentary.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a great way. I mean, you think about municipalities that have to pay, every square foot of that dump, the landfill, it's all worth money. So if there's other ways, creative ways they can use to extend the life of that, that helps not only the city, but it helps the community because we're the ones that are paying for that. Like I know for Corpus, we pay in our water bill, we're paying for our waste. And so if you can extend the life of the landfill and you're helping to recycle things, that's good. And I'm not advocating for not recycling. I'm just trying to show the problems.
That's what I heard, Jayce. That's what I heard, Jay. No.
So I recycle. I think the problem is for a lot of communities, it's less than 10% of the people that are actually recycling.
Yeah.
So.
And they don't do it correctly either too, right? They don't wash the bottles out, and it's like they end up splitting the trash and throwing the stuff away that's not correct or whatever.
Or they put a glass bottle into with all the paper and everything, and all of a sudden everything in the whole bin is contaminated. It's like, oh, okay.
When people volunteer with your organization, and it's the first time going and spending time and picking up these plastic pellets, what are some of their reactions? You have any like memorable ones, the people that were maybe they were made to go do this like community service stuff, and then they were pretty touched?
Oh yeah, I mean, we work with like school groups all the time, Girl Scout, Boy Scouts, homeschoolers, colleges. I mean, we work with all types of people, and they're always amazed. And lots of times they'll say, I've seen those. I've been seeing those for years. And they said, I thought those were fish eggs or seeds. I didn't know that was plastic. And they kind of get upset about it. It's like, well, who's doing something about it? I said, nobody. Nobody's doing anything about it, I said, but now that Nurdle Patrol's here, what we would like to see is that states would have an organization that has connections to where they could go out and not just go to the beach, because the beach, people or the industry likes to blame it on ocean currents and, it's from another country or it's a spill offshore. But if you can go up into the watershed, that's where you really start making the case of like, we found this 20 miles up the river. And what's upstream from there? There's plastic manufacturing sites or there's railroads. It's like, this did not come from the ocean. Now you're really painting a picture of like where this could be coming from, and that it could be a state problem and that the state needs to handle this. And so we're always trying to get people to try to see the bigger picture of this. And when Nurdle Patrol first started out, there was a spill here in Corpus Christi, and this was in 2018. We wanted about 4 or 5 people to help us out. We were looking at like a 20 to 30 mile stretch of beach, and we created this Facebook page that we were going to post on once a month. And so we were just going to see, how long these nurdles would be out there, how far they spread. That was the main thing. Well, we started that Facebook page up. It's a private group, a closed group, or whatever they call it. And we had about 300 people sign up in the first couple of weeks. And they said, man, they're like, I'm from Mississippi or I'm from Florida. They're like, I'm down in Mexico. We want to know if this is showing up on our beach. And I was like, whoa, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because, if we were just looking at this 30-mile stretch, we would not be able to do any kind of changes. We would never have known that this is coming. The hottest spot in the United States is 30 miles up into Galveston Bay, where the highest concentration of plastic manufacturing is, or the Mississippi River is the second highest, which drains 41% of the United States. It's like a lot of what we're finding is probably we are the producing all this. We are the ones that are causing this problem, which has really been able to give us the justification for going to the states and saying, look, we are the problem here and we can do something about it. We just need 0 plastic pellet loss in our permits. And that will be a starting point for us to start making change. And so, that now we have about 7,000 volunteers that have sent data in. Over 15,000 surveys have been done. And, we create these starter kits and teacher kits that we send out to groups to start up their own Nurdle Patrol. And I think that's why we've got over 220 partners that we work with around the world. Most of them are in the US and Mexico, but they're now they have their own program called Nurdle Patrol starting up. So that's why you might be in Philadelphia, you might be in San Francisco, and you might say, oh, these people have their own Nurdle Patrol too. And they're saying it's theirs. It is. That's the way we planned it out. We actually, we give all these groups a flash drive that has all of our materials on it, either in English or Spanish. And there's a space available either on a presentation or the cards where they can put their own logo to make it their own. Because the only kind of catch to this is they need to be able to put all their data into nurdlepatrol.org, so that big scale, that's how we see the big picture, is like everybody putting their information in there. And then we can try to work with different groups in the different states to try to get changes made.
Formosa was clearly made the example from a bad actor standpoint. Is there any company that is upfront to work with, that's transparent with information, that you've collaborated with, or are they all kind of in their own little corner?
Yeah, well, all the plastics industry, they have a group. They get together, they talk all the time on, not only best management practices to prevent the plastic from getting out, but on industry-wide standards for producing plastic. That's probably their main thing is like the business. But no, I've met with some of them. But I have not. The only one I've ever been able to tour, I've been hung up on quite a few times on trying to get tours of places. But the Exxon Sabic plant was the ones that had come in and invited me in actually to show me all their new stuff, and it's very impressive. But the others, no, I've been talked with a lot on what they thought the problem was and how they're trying to remedy it. But not they've never invited me into their facility. And even with Exxon, they did not allow any cameras or anything. Although they took a lot of pictures of me when I was there. So
yeah. so they can say they're working with you.
Yeah, I think so. But I think that industry is going to have to be part of the conversation and be involved in it. We can't think that we're going to be over here collecting all this data and then working with the groups that are taking the information and trying to make regulatory changes. I mean, they need to be part of the conversation. We need to know what they're doing without being regulated. I mean, are they trying to make changes? Are they just doing, the status quo of what they've done in the past? So I think it's important for us to have a relationship with them.
You made a great point, Jayce. I know from experience that these companies are spending a lot of time and money on developing projects to mitigate spillage, to mitigate from plastic escaping the fence lines, but it's not being broadly communicated to the general public. And I think that's a gap that not just the company I work for, but other companies could share with. I know they're working on it, but from a general public perception, no one knows about it. So
right. I mean, a lot of the stuff I found is in plastics magazines. They're not coming out in like Texas Parks and Wildlife they have a magazine, and they're the ones that are supposed to be managing for wildlife and habitats and stuff like that. That's the kind of place that they ought to be putting ads out showing what they're doing. Maybe even some of the fishing groups, Coastal Conservation Association, which is now nationwide, they have magazines. They ought to be going out into the community and putting some money in advertisement to show people what they're doing. And actually, I have to go dig around for this stuff to be able to put it out there. But if they would contact like me, I could put it up on our social media networks, because we don't just put the negative stuff out there. We like to show that, look, there's progress being made. We have to be positive at least some of the time. It's not all doom and gloom, and we got to keep it fun as well, which I think Nurdle Patrol is sort of fun, because it's like a competition when you go out there and you're like, it's not a competition, but I'm going to find more than you. But, and that's why, we have a monthly prize that we get out to the organization or the individual that does the most surveys. So we have a plastic-free life challenge is what we call it. And if you win, we have a box of goodies that we send you that, there's metal straws in there, bamboo utensils, resealable. It is plastic, but the resealable Ziploc bags that are reusable. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that in there that somebody could immediately be ready to go plastic free, at least partially in their house. So we try to make it fun for folks by doing stuff like that.
Jayce, I think the work you're doing is amazing. And I like to follow everything you're doing. If people want to get involved with Nurdle Patrol or just stay up to date, how can people reach out and follow your work?
Yeah, nurdlepatrol.org is a good way to do that. We have a news page. Nurdle Patrol Facebook page is a closed group, and the reason it's a closed group, which just means you have to ask to be invited, or you have to ask to join, and then we say yes to everybody. But there's a lot of industrial people in the industry of plastics that are on there. A lot of federal and state agency folks that are monitoring to see what's going on. They're on there, and if they post or make a comment or like something, they don't want their peers to see. So we've kept it a closed group, private group, or whatever it's called. So that's a good way. Like if anything comes out in the news about a research project or a spill that happens anywhere in the world, that's really the first place that it gets posted to. So it's a good way to keep up on, what's going on in the Nurdle world. And if something happens, with us and what we're doing, we always post it on there.
Awesome.
So that's a good way.
Well, I appreciate your time, Jayce. I think these conversations are important. I think having these open dialogues is what will help make change. So I appreciate it.
All righty, no problem.
Thanks,
we'll see y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.